On Monday, Keir Starmer told me he was now in phase 2 with a focus on delivery. After taking delivery of Angela Rayner's resignation letter, is phase 3's cabinet carousel enough to rescue his premiership? And Donald Trump's former vice president, Mike Pence, tells Newsnight he believes God's grace saved the president from assassination and urges his former boss to go further in sanctioning Russia. Good evening, welcome to Friday's Newsnight with Matt Chorley, live from Broadcasting House, making sense of a huge day in British politics. And if that wasn't enough, we'll hear from a former vice president as well. Now, for 20 years, I've been going to party conferences as a political journalist, only to find out all too often that the big story is elsewhere. So, while I was in Birmingham today with Reform UK's Nigel Farage bigging up his team, 100 miles away, Keir Starmer was having to smash his up and start again. Luckily, we've assembled the best possible team for you tonight. Tom McTague is the editor of The New Statesman, the in-house magazine of the left. Ayesha Hazariq is a former Labour advisor and in the House of Lords as a Baroness. And Fraser Nelson is a Times columnist who's fresh back with the inside story from Reform's conference, which we all come to. Nick is back from Birmingham too. We've all been to Birmingham and we've all come rushing back. Nick, this has been a huge day for this government and for British politics.
A huge day, Matt, and a day of peril for the Prime Minister. He lost his deputy, not any old deputy, an iconic figure in the Labour movement. What does that mean? Is Angela Rayner going to be the queen over the water for the future? Is she immediately going to be a rallying point for the Labour soft left? Or, handwritten note from the Prime Minister, will relations be better than that? What do you do when you're a leader and you have a moment of peril? You try and turn it into a moment of opportunity, hence that reshuffle. I would say the most significant appointment, I think, is Shabana Mahmood as the Home Secretary. From the blue Labour element of the party, socially conservative, big on immigration. And I think what we might well see is a change in substance on the small boats. Shabana Mahmood has talked about reforming the European Convention on Human Rights and potentially a change in tone as Keir Starmer faces up, let's mix our metaphors here, I would say, to the two elephants on their doorstep. One is a human elephant in the form of Nigel Farage. The other one is a thing elephant in the form of those small boats.
Thing elephant.
Could you get an elephant on a small boat?
The key thing,
let's not get bogged down in it.
The key thing is, on a big dramatic evening, you've got to mix your metaphors.
Mix your metaphors. Tom, where is Keir Starmer's authority tonight?
Well, I think he's managed to wrestle some of it back, actually. From what should have been a completely disastrous day, he's managed to at least show some initiative by saying, right, here's a crisis, I'm going to turn it into an opportunity to reshape the cabinet. That is a smart move. He is at least controlling events, which is absolutely key. But it's also a shift to the right in the Labour Party. That's absolutely clear here in what is going on with the cabinet. Shabana Mahmood is clearly on the right of the Labour Party, really quite significantly to the right if you listen to her privately, but you've also got movements with Peter Kyle and Pat McFadden. This is a shift in the centre of gravity of this government, and I think the question is, does Starmer believe that? We've had different types of messaging from him over the past few months. We've had the Islands of Strangers speech, then he seemed to row back on it. Now we're into a place, as Nick says, where we have a Home Secretary who questions the ECHR. So it's shifting around, and we need clarity from the Prime Minister.
Aisha, you know the Labour Party better than most. You know all the characters in this. How will Angela Rayner be feeling?
Not good right now. And I think it's a great shame for her, and it's a great shame for the party, and it's a shame for politics. Look, what she did was wrong, and she absolutely had to go. But I think what a lot of people feel is that politics is pretty beige or grey, however you want to look at it. And she stood out as a very sort of technicolor politician. You know, she's this incredible backstory. She's got that grit under her fingernails. She's got this sort of life history. You couldn't make it up. It's like, who would play Angela Rayner in the film of her life? And I feel that lots of people in the party are quite cross with her because she's gone, because she did represent a sort of an emotional connection that sometimes people feel the party is lacking. But I agree with the analysis you've put forward. Look, there's no way of sweetening the pill. Like, this isn't a great day for the Labour Party or for the government. But what I think we have seen is a sharpening up of the operation at number 10. From a media management point of view, tonight's story as we head into tomorrow's news cycle is about this reshuffle instead of just going over the Angela Rayner obituary.
If you just stuck one person back into housing and said that's the end of it for now, it would all still be about Angela Rayner.
And I think the two appointments that stand out to me the most, if you want to pick two stories that will follow as a consequence of this reshuffle, absolutely immigration is one of them. And I think the big battle ahead for the Labour Party is around the European Convention on Human Rights and the Refugee Convention. Does Shabana Mahmood lead the charge in a sort of Labour way of doing this? Does she go off into Europe and say with other leaders, right, we have got to sort of reform this to be progressive? So I think that's the number one thing. The second thing with Pat McFadden moving to DWP, a beefed up DWP, is I think that signals that welfare reform is going to come back onto the agenda.
The thing is, though, Fraser, this is not a reshuffle the Prime Minister wanted. On Monday, number 10 sources were saying explicitly there were going to be no changes to the Cabinet. Next week there might have been a junior reshuffle of ministers. So to go from the Cabinet's absolutely great, losing one person, then shaking everything up, it's a big, bold move.
Yes, well, we were told on Monday we had a phase 2, which didn't look like a phase 2, but now he's had phase 2 thrust upon him. If you look at the changes he's made, this is obviously, whether he wants it or not, a directive to change it. I mean, like Shabana Mahmood, for example, she doesn't live very long, but she could be the one who says, OK, the ECHR is a bit of a red herring, but let's tear up the Refugee Convention. We're hearing lots of voices now, David Blunkett, Jack Straw, Charlie Falconer, Ken MacDonald, all of them saying that the laws need to fundamentally change. She could be the person who runs with that momentum and does it. And in welfare reform, Pat McFadden, of course, the Liz Kendall experiment was a disaster in the end, but he'll hopefully have learned from that and worked out that the way you do this is not a head-on confrontation with the backbenches. You can reform welfare very radically without changing any laws at all, just changing the marching orders given to those signing up with 2,000-3,000 a day put on sickness benefit. So if this is, I think, Keir Starmer's one chance to learn from his many mistakes and genuinely reset his government.
There is a risk to this, though, Nick. This might be that actually I've got the right people in the right place now. But I was looking this up. I think PA totted them up. Angela Rayner is the 11th person to leave the Labour government since the general election. In the same period, Rishi Sunak lost 10, Boris Johnson 8, Theresa May 4. This is the guy who stood outside number 10 and said politics will tread more lightly on your lives. And Luke Chill, the pollster, was on my Five Live show today saying lots of voters feel like this is just a rerun of what they thought was ending the case.
Well, and of course, we wouldn't want to dream of mentioning those of our colleagues who were saying when this government was appointed it's going to be a period of stability and people not sort of having musical chairs, and that is exactly what has happened. Some of it is political, some of it is personal stuff. But in terms of a reshuffle, I mean, we have all covered many reshuffles, and you get the briefing from Downing Street, this is going to completely transform this government, and you say, well, that's what you said last time. And so it's interesting, they've just sort of handed that list and we've had to divine it. And as I was saying, I look at all those appointments and they all point to musical chairs to have Shabana Mahmood as the key person. And as you say, Aisha, having Pat McFadden, very significant work and pensions in terms of welfare reform, that will come back in another guise. But also he's got skills and productivity, the absolute challenge of this economy. So those are the two big things there.
Well, as I said at the beginning, on Monday, I went into Downing Street to interview Keir Starmer at the Cabinet table, where he described his frustration at the lack of progress in his first year.
Yeah, I get that frustration because after 14 years of the last government, people voted for change and they want change. The reason I said a year or so ago that it'll take time is because I wanted to level with the public that after 14 years worth of failure, public services, the economy, you name it, it was going to take time to turn it around. That is frustrating because people want change as quickly as possible. I completely get that, and I want it as quickly as possible. I think here, a year on in, what I would say is we spent the first year sort of fixing the foundations, if you like, doing the hard yards, but we now enter into sort of phase 2 of the government, which is where we focus on delivery, and start to show what a difference a Labour government really makes. And so, yes, it was always going to take time. The urgency and the frustration, I completely understand. I want to go further and faster.
Yeah, so just a reminder, that was Monday. Aisha, tell me this. If there was a government minister who wasn't doing their job properly and the Prime Minister wasn't happy, wouldn't he just get rid of them rather than moving them somewhere else. All the top jobs, people have just shuffled around. Won't that leave voters a bit confused? Either Yvette Cooper was a good minister or she wasn't.
I mean, I suspect the reality is that your kind of average person is not studying the minutiae of this. What they will be caring about is, in a reasonable amount of time, where are we with the cost of living crisis? Where are we with NHS waiting lists? Where are we with crime, antisocial behaviour, shoplifting? And of course, where are we on immigration? And I think the reason why, and I know we've kind of come back to sort of Shabana and Pat, but I think the reason why they are so important is if you think about all the challenges just in the Justice Department, she is somebody who had an absolute nightmare brief and has yet managed to bulldozer stuff through in terms of creating this new narrative about why we've got to build more prisons. There were some very difficult moments with sentencing guidelines. She's just put legislation through on that. She's got Brian Levison to effectively bring in getting rid of trial by jury in certain cases. So she's seen as somebody who can take a very, very difficult sort of set of circumstances and actually make it into kind of progress. And we were just talking earlier about what kind of reshuffle this was. I had a lengthy chat with Maurice Glassman today, who is the architect of Blue Labour, which is controversial within the Labour Party, but it is incredibly dominant, I would say, right, in terms of the political thinking within Downing Street. And we had a long chat for about 15 minutes, and the person he kept coming back to as he thought the person who could get the party through these difficult times was Shabana Mahmood. And I think if you look at Pat McFadden as somebody who's seen as he understands, and he understands that, working the different levers of government. I think about that interview you did with Keir Starmer. It was such a great interview and such great timing. This phase 2 thing is going to be very, very, very. I mean, the questioning was amazing as well. But this is all about delivery. The other person, of course, who's incredibly important in all of this is Darren Jones as well. He's had a big week, and if you think about the job he was doing at the Treasury, he basically got the spending review through. That is incredibly difficult, and he's probably one of the few people that knows where all the bodies are buried across every single department. And he got that spending review through calmly. It didn't all leak. Nobody resigned over it. So you've got kind of 3 people: Shabana Mahmood, you've got Pat McFadden, and you've got Darren Jones, who are going to be really important, and they are going to be charged with the delivery now.
Tom, earlier this week I spoke to a very senior Labour figure who's normally publicly and privately very supportive of Keir Starmer. They said being leader is the only time you have total control to pick your team, and you have to keep chopping and changing your team. Eventually, people will ask if the person doing the picking is the problem. How many more resets, relaunches, reboots has Keir Starmer got?
It's interesting, that phrase, who's doing the picking, because if you look at Shabana Mahmood, she is not a Starmerite. The two aren't close, right? Keir Starmer and Shabana Mahmood are not close allies, friends, or anything like that. Starmer doesn't have that many close friends in politics. He doesn't speak to his cabinet very often. That's part of the problem. This is not like Tony Blair or Gordon Brown, where you knew who their key allies were, their ideological allies, and they were going to promote them, and you could see that this was a kind of a victory for the Blairites or the Brownites or the Cameroons or whatever. This is something you almost think this is a project now that is it feels like somebody else's project. It doesn't feel like an obvious Starmer project. These look like Morgan McSweeney's picks to me. Shabana Mahmood is close to Morgan McSweeney. Peter Kyle, Pat McFadden. These are figures on the right of the Labour Party that would be seen closer to kind of Blairite figures or Blue Labour figures. And yet we don't get that message from the Prime Minister himself. We get something else, or we get different...
You have to be quite a close studier of sort of Westminster tea leaves to sort of work that out.
But this is a problem, right?
Is this a reform reshuffle, Fraser?
What do you mean by that?
Well, is it designed? Is it aimed squarely at reform?
I wouldn't say that. I would say it's aimed at the biggest fires that are burning in politics right now. I mean, the small boats crisis and immigration is number 1, and welfare is number 2. So no matter who's attacking him, even if nobody was attacking him, he'd want to sort these things out. And he can. I mean, for example, he could quite conceivably achieve net zero immigration within 18 months if he wanted. I mean, right now there are something like 400,000 people leaving the country, foreign nationals leaving the country every year. So immigration below 400,000 would be net zero, like Sweden has achieved. That is very doable. All you need to do is just increase the threshold for visa renewals, and you've gone there. Now, so Shabana Mahmood could do that. That could be her signature.
I mean, that would be a huge win. In the
by the way, that would take so much wind out of reform reform sales.
It's interesting what you said, that you had that rather barbed remark, Matt, from somebody who would be normally supportive of the Prime Minister. The thing that's really struck me in the last few months is the darkening mood about Keir Starmer's premiership amongst loyalists. And I heard from one, I couldn't believe it not that long ago, one absolute uber loyalist wondered whether Keir Starmer can make it through the summer next year. They believe the Scottish Holyrood elections and the Welsh Senedd elections could go badly for Labour and could be very, very difficult for Keir Starmer.
And in part because of the rise of reform. So let's move on to that. Nick, I've seen more of you today than I have my own wife. There we were, 12 hours ago in Birmingham, hanging out. The bar was already open. People were, by the time I saw you, some people were on to their second pint. You were there. Nigel Farage did his big speech. How's he feeling tonight? Overshadowed, yes, but also probably cock a hoop that the government's in a mess?
Yeah, I mean, Matt, obviously I'm honoured to have spent so much time with you today, more than I've seen my wife. And my wife is a senior editor at the BBC. I better watch out what I say, that I'm within the rules of impartiality. Yes, absolutely, it was overshadowed, the speech by Angela Rayner's resignation. They'd been wargaming it. They were thinking, what are we going to do? They'd wargamed it the night before. What they decided to do was bring Nigel Farage's speech forward by 3 hours and make a virtue of that resignation to ram home his key point, which is they briefed to us, which is that they think this government could collapse by 2027. They think there'll have to be an austerity budget that this government will not be able to get through, and ram that through about how they, Reform UK, have got to show they're ready for government. Anyway, lots of reform luminaries, and I caught up with some of them.
What an amazing speech, absolutely outstanding. We're getting ready for government. You've heard it from our leader, and this election could come earlier than people expect.
Quite an entrance, entering to your song sung by you.
I'm an insomniac. I'm an insomniac.
I just got this inspiration, look, because I feel that we are sleepwalking into a disaster.
Was Nigel Farage for once overshadowed by Angela Rayner and that resignation?
Far from it. No one ever overshadows Nigel.
I mean, the timing's quite curious as well, just before our conference is about to start. I think they're probably try to steal the front pages, probably will, but that doesn't matter. We've got 6,000 members of the People's Army here today. They're going to storm this conference.
Is this party, I know they're nervous, are they ready? Are you ready for government? Nigel Farage says it could happen in 2 years' time.
Yes. No, we are. Reform is waking up Britain. We will save Britain, and I'm convinced of that, and that's why I joined the party.
Well, Nick, I won't ask you to sing Insomniac either, or to explain, can you be sleepwalking if you're in Insomniac? Because you'd have to be asleep. Fraser, you were at the conference. How does it compare to other party conferences? For normal people who might be watching who've never been to a party conference, how does it compare?
Well, I was contrasting it with last year's Reform Conference. That was a fringe event, really, a few curious journalists there, not many other people. This is a fully fledged party, thousands of members. And it reminded me of the SNP transformation 10 years ago, where all of a sudden you had a new generation of people flooding in, and Nicola Sturgeon quadrupled membership, just like Nigel Farage has now done. And when you go to the Labour Party conference, it's a bit like kind of Davos on Mersey, right? People are wandering around in suits and lanyards because they're paid to be there. You don't see many activists.
Lobbyists and consultants.
Exactly. People in the business of politics. And the same with Tory. It's a kind of good-humoured wake, pretty much, for Tory conference. But this Reform conference was full of optimism, full of people who'd been inspired by Nigel Farage and his message to join. And they believed they had a mission. They were full of expectation, but they were about to have a breakthrough as well. So this felt to me like a really serious party which is absolutely able to win. Of course, the policies weren't there. You wouldn't expect them to be so far from an election. But the other thing is, when Farage went to speak, it was 1 o'clock, so I toured the fringes to see, as everybody left the other discussions to go and see the real leader, is it a one-man band? But no, there were hundreds of people who decided not to listen to Nigel Farage, but instead listened to Professor James Orr talking about the demos versus the cosmos, listened to David Starkey. This is a genuine movement with its own academics, its own theory, its own theories of culture, of economics. It's got more vitality to it, I think, than any political party.
Interesting, though, Tom, Fraser mentions policies. Zia Youssef, former chairman, former head of Doge, now head of policy. I mean, in the run-up to this, in lots of the interviews, they have been coming under pressure for where are the policies? Do your numbers add up? What are your plans?
Yeah, I mean, and they're going to come under increasing pressure as we get towards election, inevitably as they are at 35% in the polls or more, perhaps. I mean, it reminds me less of a British conference than a Republican convention. I mean, it's so obviously taken from a Trump rally, and that is, in a sense, what British politics has always done. If you think back to Tony Blair, he is taking inspiration from Bill Clinton. We're looking over to the Americans and we're taking inspiration, and that is what they're doing now. And why wouldn't we think that might be successful? That is obviously a smart tactic. But what they had in the States, of course, they also had Project 2025, they had the Heritage Foundation, they had the ideological thinking that went alongside Trump's successful second bid for the presidency. I don't yet see that. They do have the academics. Fraser is completely right, and that is something, frankly, that the Tories don't have it anymore. They don't have the ideas. Reform is starting to get them, but it's not quite there yet. Should
Labour, should Keir Starmer look across to across the Atlantic, not the politics, but the approach to communication of Donald Trump?
Well, I think what you're seeing, particularly with reform at the moment, as you say, it's not so much about the policies. I mean, Nigel Farage said that he was going to stop all boats within a fortnight of becoming Prime Minister. I mean, that's just simply sort of not possible. But it's about that kind of vibes, isn't it? It's about that kind of, communicating in a sort of emotional way, which I think mainstream politics has failed to do. But what I think is interesting is we're talking a lot about reform, and of course they're having their sort of conference. But if you look at what's happening on the left of politics, you could see something similar happening there. And I think you've got this new, whatever this party is with Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana. You've got Zach Polansky's election, which I think is actually going to be very consequential as well. If there's some kind of, as a leader of the Greens, if there's some kind of alignment between the Greens and Jeremy Corbyn, Zara Sultana, the Gaza independents, Zach Polansky, you can see he's quite memeable, he's quite quotable, he's quite clippable.
Too memeable.
You could kind of see, and people are saying, is he going to try and be a Nigel Farage of the left? So I think that style of communication you're seeing on the right of politics, you're also going to see it on the far left of politics as well. The question is, can this Labour government, can the Conservatives, can the two sort of heritage parties, if you like, can they keep up with this new style of communications?
Well, let's take a look then at the papers for tomorrow. Who's won the battle for the front pages? Is it Nigel Farage? Is it Keir Starmer? On the front of the Telegraph, exit Rayner. Now Starmer takes the fight to reform. On the front of the Guardian, PM battles to contain crisis after Rayner forced to resign. On the front of the Mirror, Nigel Farage is on there, though he might not be that pleased. Luxury house Farage boasted of buying was purchased by his partner, slashing his tax bill by £44,000. Stamp duty hypocrite, they call him. And on the front of the Mail, nightmare on Downing Street. I'm not sure that's necessarily the headline that Keir Starmer was looking for. Before we move on, who do we all think is going to be the next deputy leader of the Labour Party? Aisha?
I actually think if Louise Haigh runs, she's got a
Fraser?
chance.
Anybody's guess. I mean, who saw Corbyn coming?
God, you stole my choice. Maybe I'll throw in. Will Richard Bergen throw his hat into the ring?
And this all points to the fact there's a big problem, isn't it, Nick, if it ends up being someone from the left?
Look, Lieu Haigh, she ran the rebellion that was successful, and she's from the soft left. Richard Bergen's from the campaign group, so probably the nominations are too high for him.
I'll be interested to see him. We'll obviously be following all that on my 5 Live show, weekdays 2 o'clock on BBC Radio 5 Live. Now, let's go to America now, where for 4 years Mike Pence was at Donald Trump's side as vice president during his first term. That all soured when Trump supporters stormed the Capitol trying to stop Pence from certifying the election, which Joe Biden won. He's been speaking to Paddy about his old boss and how President Trump's response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine has seen stops and starts.
Well, first, I want to give President Trump great credit. The old book says, blessed are the peacemakers. And I think the president's determination to remain engaged to bring about peace in Ukraine is commendable. There've been voices around the president in my country and even in his administration that frankly would have cut off American support to Ukraine months ago, but the president's remained persistent. And in my judgment, the action that the United States should take is that the U.S. Senate should send those secondary sanctions that are waiting on the floor of the chamber to the floor, vote them, put them on the president's desk and have the president sign them into law. Look, I've met Vladimir Putin. I believe Putin doesn't want peace. He wants Ukraine, and he will only respond to strength and unity. And now is a moment where we ought to make it clear, as our allies here in Europe did this week in Paris, that we'll continue to provide the military support necessary for Ukraine to defend their freedom and their sovereignty. But I think the time has come for renewed and additional sanctions by the United States, and I'm going to continue to call for that along with our allies as well.
And do you have any purchase on the 47th president? You're saying you want secondary sanctions. There's a bill in the Senate. Do you call Donald Trump and say, now's the time? Is that what the sort of relationship you still have with him?
Well, you know, the president and I don't talk as much as we used to. I'm proud of the relationship we enjoyed for 4 years. I'm proud of the record we created.
It looks a lot like Vladimir Putin ignores him. That's what I'm getting at. You know, your relationship's changed. Vladimir Putin seems to ignore Donald Trump.
Well, you hear otherwise. The president continues to insist that his dialogues with Vladimir Putin have been productive. But I think I join freedom-loving people around the world and people who, like me, have strongly stood with Ukraine now for more than 3 years. In the belief that now is the time for action. And in the United States Senate, there's only 100 members of the Senate. As you know, 85 members of the Senate have co-sponsored those strong secondary sanctions. I think they ought to go to the president's desk. And I call on our European allies not only to do more with regard to renewed military support and pledges for security guarantees if there is a ceasefire, but as President Trump called on this week, I think more economic efforts to isolate Russia is the order of the day today.
Would you encourage Europe to seize Russian bank accounts in the way that they can spend Russian money on weapons for Ukraine?
I think everything should be on the table, including seizing frozen accounts. Look, this war was an act of naked aggression by Russia against Ukraine. I think it's essential that the West continue to stand strong, because I have no doubt in my mind, if Vladimir Putin overruns Ukraine, it'll only be a matter of time before he crosses a border of a NATO country where my country and all of our allies will have to confront him militarily.
And so do you say that the president gets that? Because that is exactly the fear in the Baltic nations, for instance. And do you say that the US security guarantee should be boots on the ground?
Well, I've been very encouraged just this week, frankly, by the leadership among our allies in Europe to formulate the kind of security guarantees that would create the conditions for a just and lasting peace. I think the United States has made it clear, this administration has made it clear that there'll be a backstop to that. But with our European allies in the forefront. Not surprisingly, Vladimir Putin has already begun to rattle his saber to suggest that European troops on the ground in Ukraine would be, I think in his word, legitimate targets. But that to me tells me that the efforts of our allies coming together in Europe, a backstop by the United States American military, has captured Vladimir Putin's attention and may well be a pathway toward long-term peace.
Okay. You told us you don't really talk as much to Donald Trump as you did, and we remember your role certifying the election results in Congress, which the Donald Trump administration said were stolen. The election was stolen. Can you? You've just won this award, the John F. Kennedy Profiling Courage Award. Can you tell viewers how close you were to the insurgency in the Capitol, how much you heard of the approaching mob when they were trying to take the election result and get you to change them?
Well, first let me say thank you for your gracious words. You know, January 6th was a tragic day. But I'll always believe, by God's grace, I did my duty that day to support the peaceful transfer of power under the Constitution of the United States. The riot that took place at the Capitol was harrowing for many. We heard the crowds. But I must tell you, I've often said the safest place in the world is to be in the center of God's will. And I knew I was where I was supposed to be, doing what I was supposed to be doing. I had peace and resolve in that. And thanks to law enforcement on the scene, the riot was quelled.
And just as a flashback, did you look at the door of the chamber in which you were sitting and think at any moment those guys could come through the door? Did you think that?
I didn't. When I was escorted off of the floor of the Senate, I had been informed that there were some rioters in the building. But, you know, I actually served in Congress for 12 years before I was vice president. I had great confidence that law enforcement on the scene would be able to secure the Capitol. I never imagined that the day would unfold as it did. But when it did, ultimately law enforcement did their job bravely. Even though they were outmanned at times, they fought on. They secured the Capitol, and again, I truly do believe that what the world, I hope, witnessed that day was the resilience of our institutions and the deep commitment of people in both political parties.
Do you support RFK Jr. as the health secretary? Is he the right man to secure the health of American children?
Well, I must tell you, I and my foundation in Washington, I think, were one of the very few voices to oppose his nomination as Secretary of Health and Human Services. It was on a range of issues, beginning for me with my pro-life views. I'm pro-life. I don't apologize for it, and the idea that we would have an abortion rights supporter leading a Republican administration's health department was anathema to me. But beyond that was just a number of his theories and his long-standing record of vaccine skepticism and attacks on our pharmaceutical industry and courts. I just had great concerns about that. I spoke out against it, and I continue to hope that President Trump will have an opportunity for a fresh start.
Okay.
At the Health and Human Services Department.
That's diplomat speak for fire him. We understand. We've translated a translation there. Just on the question of compensation, do you think they'll be successful, the jailed rioters, in getting dollars off the state?
Well, I think people that assaulted police officers, desecrated our Capitol, should have been held to the fullest extent of the law. And I cannot imagine that absent people that were not caught up in the violence or people whose rights were violated, that there would be any justification for compensation for people who engaged in violence or vandalism that day.
And we're talking about it, and that's why I mentioned to you, it's painful for you to come to Europe and be told we think it's gone through the looking glass, a post-truth world in the US. Because if you take, for example, the role of the Vice President, J.D. Vance, he said of critics in the Senate of RFK Jr., which could notionally include your criticisms as well, that they're full of shit. Is that a way for a Vice President to speak? And do you consider that he's speaking about you and your views?
Well, you'd probably have to ask my successor who he was speaking about. But I want to challenge you. I don't think America's through the looking glass. I travel across our country all the time. I still believe the American people have those same common sense values and virtues for which we're known and celebrated, the same generosity of spirit that the American people have already reflected. And I'm very confident that someday soon we're going to have government as good as our people again.
Okay, so that means that if Donald Trump ever speaks about running for a third term, you would say it's just a joke. That's not a post-truth, anti-constitutional remark, for instance.
The Constitution of the United States is quite clear that presidents are entitled to 2 terms in office, and I think the American people have every expectation that this president and any president will hew to that.
we've mentioned J.D. Vance. I saw a smile flicker across your face there. Do you think he's having a bigger role than you did? Are you jealous?
I'll always count it a privilege to have been vice president with President Donald Trump. I'm proud of the record that we created. I pray for the president often. I pray for the vice president, and I wish them well. But I don't spend a lot of time in the rearview mirror. I'm always eyes forward, always focused on those values that have always drawn me into public life.
And then just on that question of you praying for the president, do you agree with him that it was an act of God which saved him from the assassination attempt?
I have to believe that God's grace was present that day, and I couldn't be more grateful that the president was spared from that assassin's bullet. I remember I found out about it almost in real time. We were landing an airplane back in Indiana when the news just broke, and I immediately went to Twitter. I grabbed my wife's hand. We prayed for the president, not knowing his condition, and we urged people around the country to pray earnestly for him. And I'm grateful he was spared. I'm grateful the nation was spared, and I'll continue as I promised him one day before we left the White House. I'll always pray for our president and his family.
Mike Pence, please come back on Newsnight. It's been very good of you to give us your time. Thank you.
And thanks to Paddy for that as well. Fraser, just going back to the start of that interview, what chance is there that Putin will start listening to President Trump?
I think he's more likely to listen because of what Mike Pence is trying to do. The secondary sanctions bill we're trying to look at in Congress would impose sanctions up to 500% on all the countries that buy oil from Russia. So that's China, India, Turkey. Now, if that is forced through, it would force these countries to choose between trade with Russia or access to American markets. That's a serious threat. Trump is beginning to think, well, maybe Mike Pence is right here. If Putin's not going to play it my way, let's see if we can get these congressional hawks to do their worst. So I think we can see part of a double punch here.
And the end of the interview talked about J.D. Vance, Nick. The person in the reshuffle we haven't really talked about, David Lammy, out as Foreign Secretary, down to Justice Secretary, but also Deputy Prime Minister. How much of that do you think is to do with his close friendship with J.D. Vance and the state visit coming around the corner?
I'm sure it's a lot to do that, because under protocol, the UK Deputy Prime Minister engages with the Vice President of the United States. David Lammy does have that very good rapport that he has established with the Vice President. He could go fishing again with him, but maybe he'll get the licence done properly this time.
Beforehand. I mean, that's the other thing, is it? Keir Starmer, he's gone through this week. In 2 weeks' time, Donald Trump will be here, Tom.
Oh, God. It never stops, does it, for the Prime Minister? But I think he has to show, as when that state visit happens, that he has some kind of personality, some kind of authority himself. Because if you think about the world stage at the moment, it is absolutely striking how dependent we are on the whims, on the decisions, whether Putin is listening to Donald Trump or not. Where is Europe's voice in this? We just don't seem to have one.
I mean, Keir Starmer's tried to, with the coalition of the willing and the endless Zoom calls, and that big moment when they went to the White House, but then it's all gone quiet again. Well,
I think, to be fair to Keir Starmer, he's actually done a good job on the world stage. But I think the reality is we've got so many conflicts going on. We've spent a lot of time talking about Ukraine. We've got the terrible situation in Gaza. And of course, Donald Trump came in and said, I'm going to end all these wars, overnight. It's all going to finish. That is not happening. I mean, he feels like he's the kind of main power broker at the moment, but he's not actually getting any of these results. I hope that when the state visit does happen, that, this government lobbies him very, very hard, not just in Ukraine, but on the horrific situation in Gaza as well.
But then that's a lot of lobbying, isn't it, Nick? How much political capital can you use with Donald Trump?
No, absolutely. I mean, I have to say, one thing Conservatives do say, Jeremy Hunt has made this, is that where Keir Starmer does look reasonably sure-footed is on the international stage.
Well, we'll have to wait and see. We've only had the first party conference. Who knows what the next 4 or 5 weeks will bring. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. It's Paddy, who is back on Monday. Who knows who we'll have by then? Who knows what phase we'll be in by then? It's been a very long week in politics. Next week will be much the same, I imagine. That's it then. That's your Newsnight on a Friday night. Have a lovely weekend. Paddy's here on Monday. Good night.